I'm Linda Hirsch.
I'm Jim Carney, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education.
The fact that poverty can negatively affect student success is well known. But do we understand the severity of the challenges that many schools face? Today, Kim Nauer, Education Research Director at the Center for New York City Affairs, joins me to discuss their latest report, A Better Picture of Poverty, and what it reveals about poverty, chronic absenteeism, and academic success.
In New York City, we're accustomed to the signs of poverty all around us, but often not having enough has a serious impact on the daily lives of the children in our schools. Later on in the program, I'll visit the front lines to show how poverty affects our children. But we begin with Linda and her guest in the studio.
My guest today is Kim Nauer, journalist and education research director at the Center for New York City Affairs, a think tank based at the New School. Welcome to EdCast, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You've done some important research, I think, looking at poverty and schools. So can you tell us a little bit about the work that's been done that led even up to the current study?
Okay, so in November we published a study that took a look at poverty and how poverty affects elementary schools in New York City. The genesis of that study was a study we did back in 2007, which looked at chronic absenteeism in New York City, which is defined as kids who miss more than a month or more of school in their given school year. And the big headline when we published that study in 2007, 2008 was that amongst elementary students, K through 5, 1 in every 5 children in the city was missing a month or more of school.
That's a big number.
It's a big number, and a lot of people took notice of it, including the mayor, including then the city council, in the city council, Bill de Blasio, and they all said, if we're not making a good effort to get our kids to school in the elementary grades, what does that mean for middle school? What does that mean for high school?
So what was the new study going to look at?
So then I wanted to sort of update that, see how if a lot of people took action, the Department of Education, the mayor, on the absenteeism. I wanted to see if we had seen some traction and some help. But more to the point, I wanted to understand where the absenteeism number came from. And in the original study, we knew it was tightly linked to poverty. But what kind of poverty? Almost 80% of our kids in the New York City public school system are receiving free or reduced lunch. So the whole system is largely in poverty, but there's different kinds of poverty, and that's what I was trying to get to with this report.
I read somewhere, I think many people have read it, that recent studies said that 51% of U.S. school children live in poverty.
That's right.
What is that number like in the New York City area?
So here in New York City, 80% of our students are getting either free or reduced lunch. 70% are getting free lunch, which means that they're in significant poverty. And there's different levels of poverty throughout New York City. So in the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn, we see deeper levels of poverty.
So let's take a look at that. And I remember reading the report. It says something that absenteeism is almost a better indicator of poverty than free lunch or reduced lunch. Why do you say that?
Poverty itself, we've seen in education studies, doesn't necessarily hold back kids academically. It's the effects of poverty that hold kids back academically. So if you have neighborhoods where there's a lot of sort of chaos at home, where they can't get enough to eat, where they can't get to school on time, where they can't get to school at all, absenteeism, then they're going to be held back more than, say, other neighborhoods where we see this a lot in immigrant communities, where they're definitely eligible for free lunch, but their homes are largely able to keep the kids coming to school regularly, and the parents are able to keep them improving academically. So the key is to understand which schools in New York City actually need help with more help with poverty-related supports and which don't.
How many schools, what's the percentage of schools that you feel are in the most dire need?
Well, we identified 130 schools in our report that had what we call persistent levels of chronic absenteeism. Now, just remember, this report only focuses on elementary schools. We're not looking at middle or high schools. So we're looking at elementary schools. There's about 800 of them in the city. We looked at 130 of them that had levels where 40, more than a third of the kids were missing a month or more of school. So if you think about what that means in the classroom, every day a couple of your kids are missing, but they're different kids, and you have to keep going backwards and reteaching the material. That can really affect not only the kids who are absent, but also the kids who are coming every day, because the progress of those kids gets slowed down.
As a teacher, I can totally relate to that. That's absolutely true, and it's a disturbance. It disrupts the class.
It's hard. It's just hard. You have to keep repeating the materials because you don't want to leave kids behind. And kids who are absent, they're at risk of falling behind. And kids who are absent a lot are at risk of at deeper and deeper levels of risk.
Now, both former Mayor Bloomberg and current Mayor de Blasio have been looking into this issue. What was done by the Bloomberg administration, and where is the de Blasio administration picking up from? What direction are they going in?
Mayor Bloomberg's folks, after they read my original report, which came out in 2008, created a task force on absenteeism in the city that went over 3 years, and it was a pilot. They worked in conjunction with the Department of Education, and they worked with 100 schools, phasing them in over the 3-year period to test what different kinds of strategies would work on reducing chronic absenteeism. And they looked at it wasn't just elementary schools. They worked with elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools, all which require different strategies. And you'll see in this report we say, did it work? Did it not work? I think what happened with Bloomberg is that they learned a lot, and it definitely improved absenteeism in a bunch of schools, but a lot of schools didn't improve. Now, under Bill de Blasio, a big push from his administration, and one of his campaign promises, was community schools. Now, the idea of community schools is that you use outside help, outside supports to alleviate poverty-related issues in school so that the kids and the teachers can focus on education when they're in the school. And then you're using social workers and outsiders to do what they do best, and you're using your teachers to do what they do best. It's definitely a very big idea. Everybody's talking about it nationally, but we still don't know how it's going to.
I want to remind our viewers that we did a program on community schools in December, and that program is available right now on YouTube, on the CUNY YouTube site. So that is a very big part of the national dialogue now on coping with some of these things in schools. So people can certainly go.
And it featured my colleague Nicole Mader, who
figured your colleague as well. Yes, it did.
Schools guru.
So we absolutely talked a lot about community schools, and I hope people will go and take a look at that show. So let's go back a little bit. I have a question that I'm sure people have asked you before. You talked about the schools that were in the most need and had the biggest pockets of poverty. Were any charter schools among that group?
We weren't able to study charter schools.
And why not?
Well, because to take a couple steps back, the way we figured out which schools had the most need was we created this thing called a risk load analysis. And we picked 18 risk factors, some of which were from the community, some of which traveled with the student themselves, and some of which were school risk factors. So the community risk factors are things like a mother's education and level of actual poverty within a community. School risk factors are things like how much teacher turnover, how much principal turnover, and student risk factors are what percentage are, say, receive welfare. We had those kinds of things, right? And so with the charter schools, because they attract students from all over the city or all over their district, you can't do community-based analysis on them. They don't have, unlike other New York City elementary schools.
They don't come from one community.
Yeah, New York City elementary schools, for the most part, have what they call catchments, very specific analysis. You can figure out a lot about them. And they also don't participate in the same level, in the same way that the Department of Education schools do on the data systems that we have. So we do have some data on the charter schools, but not enough.
You were mentioning some of those risk factors again. So that would be the neighborhood,
right?
The community, and the school itself. And how important are those risk factors in terms of student academic success?
We based this on we took a look at what other academics nationally were saying, and they've all various studies all over have identified certain things that tend to hold kids back. Like one thing for is if a student has abuse or neglect in the home, of course this is gonna be something that can hold a kid back. We included that as a risk factor, and we also included a whole range of other things that basically academics were telling us about, and then we put them all in one easy to read matrix, and that's the extent of our analysis, was that we could show how that looked for each given elementary school, and folks can see it online. We didn't actually do in-depth analysis on like whether this was, how much this affects a given kid's academics.
Jim Carney had the opportunity to visit a school that is dealing with the effects of poverty and seeking approaches toward dealing with it. So let's take a look.
Photographs of Yankee greats are not hard to come by in the Bronx, but those with autographs dedicated to elementary school kids are. Luis Torres is principal of PS 55 in Claremont.
So we serve a very challenging community. We have a high poverty rate here in the community. We're one of the highest poverty rates in the country. We also serve a community that is currently sitting in a precinct that ranks in the top as far as crime.
What are some of the obstacles that not only the children have to overcome, but their families have to overcome that might interfere with them getting a good start in education?
Whenever I look at the community I serve and I talk to parents and others, education is like a fourth priority here. It's housing, it's safety, and it's food, and then it's education. So as a school, we have to figure out how to make education a priority within the community. So we do a lot of programs to eliminate those three other factors. I realized that the ESL program that I was offering here at the school was not well attended because it was focused on Spanish and English. But the community around the school had become more and more African. So we quickly shifted our resources and started to provide ESL services for our African families.
How do you get community partners to come forward and participate in different programs that you have with the school? And what are some of the examples?
So I brought in various resources. We have over 29 partners, and it's just not a mismatch of partners. These are people who are working here with a purpose. We've expanded our services to Montefiore Health Clinic. We have a dentist psychologist, full-time doctor on staff, and they support not only the children, but they also work closely with parents and families. We also have in our building Graham Wyndham that provides ACS prevention programs for whole families. Students ride bicycles here and they learn how electricity is generated. So for example, a student riding this bike, they'll be able to power. And recently, thanks to Stephen Ritz and the Green Bronx Machine, we started the work of creating the first indoor farm in the school, where our hopes are to provide 2 bags of produce a month to be given to the children so that they can take home and provide food for their families. We will be able to create a job creation program where parents will learn how to farm and eventually get jobs in the farming industry. Give you an example, Brandon Steiner from Steiner Sports. He came in one time as principal for a day, and ever since that time he came in, he really was touched by our school. And he's always trying to figure out what next, what can I do for Community School 55? What can I add to what I've already done? He's put a sports museum in the school. He didn't put the sports museum in the school thinking that he was going to get customers. He put it into the school because he felt that this was a way to inspire the students to reach their goals. Whenever I think about why I'm here, Desi Rodriguez comes to mind. And if you don't know Desi Rodriguez, you will know him very soon. Desi Rodriguez is a player on the Seton Hall basketball team right now. He's one of the rookie freshmen that came on board and made Seton Hall basketball relevant again. Desi Rodriguez was the type of student that was always in my office. I always joke with Desi because I remember vividly an incident in which he chipped his tooth. He cracked his tooth, and I remember him being embarrassed by it. But you know, it was just those moments I had with Desi that connected us. And now when I see him, I recently went to a Seton Hall basketball game. It's incredible to see a young man that probably didn't have much of a chance in life, stuck through all the challenges he had, and now he's going to be a leader in Seton Hall basketball, and who knows if he makes the NBA.
For EdCast, I'm Jim Carney. Now back to the studio.
That's an impressive school. Are you familiar with the school?
Right. Many of our high poverty elementary schools is how much health affects what they do. We had this in our original report, and in the current one is things like asthma attacks and other kinds of just getting sick can make kids come to school less. And so how do you deal with that at the school level? This
is the kind of thing, Kim, that I know some people disparage. I mean, there's always articles about, yeah, we know about poverty, but, you have to overcome that, and you can be wildly successful even though there's a lot of poverty. I mean, we've all seen that. What do you say to that? I mean, is it true that, yeah, poverty's there, we're never going to have enough money to get rid of poverty, so forget about it? I mean, what do you think about that?
There's a couple things. I think that you have effects of poverty, or sort of things that travel with poverty is more of a better way to do it, that we do have the ability to work on in schools. For example, health-related things. So if you have kids who are missing too much school because of either asthma attacks or because their parents are scared to send them to school on the morning of an asthma attack, that's something the school can deal with. If the kid can't see the blackboard, that's something the school can deal with. So these are things like we should clear, if we can, those kinds of things that can be dealt with so that teachers and principals can do the work of educating. And that's what the whole idea behind community schools and these community health programs.
And those things are worth doing, regardless of whether or not we can wipe out poverty. But they
are worth doing because if you don't do it, if the kid can't see the blackboard, if the child is missing too much school because of all these related issues, you're not going to get anywhere with that child. So the investment that you're putting into their education, you need to make this little additional investment to see that they actually are there to be ready to learn. That said, this is a stepping stone. You have to do a lot of other work within the actual school itself to make sure that they're getting a good education.
Now, I know the community schools, I mean, as I said, we spoke about them last month. I know the results academically for some of these schools has been somewhat mixed, and now the city is about to open over 100 new ones, I think.
That's right.
What do you think about the results that we've had with community schools? What can we expect? What's realistic? What else has to be done?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been following community schools over the years. One of the biggest operators is Children's Aid Society, which was on your program as well.
Program, yes.
And they've learned a lot about their work. And one thing we've seen in the local schools, the Children's Aid Society schools, is that they are the first to say that we need to do this work with the families and make the families want to be in the schools. That's another thing that community schools really do well, and that the kids are there. But that at the end of the day, you need a good leader. They've always said that, the Children's Aid Society.
Yes.
So I think that when we're talking about the next phase of community schools, it has to be this very sharp focus on both the community social service aspect of it and the education aspect of it. It can't be considered like some Band-Aid that's going to fix a high poverty school. There's all this pedagogical work that has to go along with it.
And so what do you see in terms of the pedagogical work? I know there's been a lot of discussion, to use a polite term, that teachers are responsible for what's happening in schools, and if we tied their evaluations to student performances on tests, we'd have much better results.
I think that puts a lot of pressure on schools the whole testing regime and all this. Unfortunately, what happens when teachers get tense is that we see a lot of teaching to the test and
But doesn't it make teachers responsible for things they can't control? I mean,
well, yes and no.
Okay.
Obviously teachers cannot control poverty, but interestingly, in my work with attendance and poverty issues over the years, I feel like the teachers are actually the ones who have the best handle on it, both what's going on in their students' lives, and we actually see in schools that the same grade can have radically different levels of attendance. So teachers make a giant difference on whether kids want to come to school or not.
Have we been able to figure out, I know this may be something no one has looked at yet, or maybe they have, what it is about particular teachers that may encourage students to come to school? Do we know?
I think this is more common sense kind of things, but and obviously this should be studied. But the big thing that we know about attendance, especially even little guys, is that if they want to come to school, they find a way to come to school. And this can include kids as young as second grade, being able to get their mothers to get them out of bed so that they can come to school.
But that's putting an awful big burden on a second grader to get a recalcitrant mother to pay caregiver.
The kids really can vote with their feet if they really love
a very
school.
Motivated child.
And then conversely, if teachers are yelling at them, if teachers are negative towards them, or administrators and say, "Oh, you showed up today. Guess what? Is that kid going to want to show up again?"
Clearly,
so it's the emotional aspect of this is really a big deal with attendance.
Is that part of the philosophy then behind the community school as well, to also to prepare an environment that's conducive to...
That's the hope. Yeah, and the interesting thing I've seen with community schools here in New York City is we have this thing in New York City called the Learning Environment Survey, which year after year they test how much the parents love the school, how much the kids love the school, how much the people who work in the school love the school. And I've noticed that community schools tend, even if they're not doing so well academically, or that A through F grade, they might be getting lower grades possibly, they go through the roof on the Learning Environment Survey. They get a lot. People like the schools.
Good.
So whether that translates to academics, once again, that comes down to the teaching.
In the few minutes that we have left, I want you to see if you can help us kind of figure out what are some of the strategies that you think, on the basis of your research, do we want to see to help schools who are really dealing with these extreme poverty challenges?
Well, the first thing that I wanted to do was, with this report, was just say it's possible to identify those schools as being different than other high poverty schools.
Should we focus on them the most, you say?
I think that you need to know that they're different, right? And then you need to have a special strategy for them. So that was one thing that I said was, once again, we're only talking about elementary schools, but I'm sure that there's plenty of high poverty middle and high schools that need special strategies as well, is right now we don't have a special poverty strategy, yet we're putting all this new attention and investment into a school poverty strategy called community schools. I said, well, let's figure out which ones have extra levels of homelessness, extra levels of child welfare, extra high levels of poverty. Maybe they need something special. And then the other thing, that if they have a lot of school chaos going on, which we would see in the Learning Environment Survey, they might need a special strategy. So I'm just saying identify them and then try to come up with a more some kind of sophisticated approach that makes them special, so that we know, okay, if you have a school that has 40% of its kids are homeless or living transient, you need a special strategy for that school, and the community school idea at least fits into it. Our challenge, I would say, with the community schools is that to do it right requires a really good principal and a staff that's committed to it, and it takes years to build a vibrant community schools environment. So it can't be saying, oh, you're a community school now and think that you are. It's one of those things that you grow into, and it really requires skill.
And it might also mean that while we're opening up a number of new community schools, we can't necessarily expect to see immediate results.
Right.
I mean, I say this from the vantage point of sitting here in this chair and, having these shows and realizing people want results immediately, and if you don't have immediate results, then
that's the thing, is
I
think that you have to view this more as something that's going to make the children's lives better and their families' lives better, with a real goal of seeing results over time. But it's not going to be immediate. If it is immediate, that means that you know, they're working more on the testing skills. You know, if you see something immediate, for better or for worse, they're working more on the testing skills.
So would you say, so for the 1 minute that we have left, what would you want us to take away from this conversation is the most important point?
I would say that we want to understand and approach school poverty in a more sophisticated manner, and I think that this mayor is really interested in doing that. So could we figure out how to do that, and then have both, you know, the folks in the building and outside the building, which is all your neighborhood health, you know, neighborhood services, do a better job for the kids who are in the highest levels of poverty.
If we're not going to do away with poverty, then we certainly need to have some really thoughtful approaches
for the kids,
to helping students.
for the little guys. I mean,
yes.
I think that that's just, you know, and then if you can start them off in elementary better, you got a better shot getting them all the way through.
Thank you so much for joining us. This really gave us a much better picture of what's happening in schools today. Kim Nauer, thank you.
Thank you.
Please don't go away. We'll be right back with our Ed Bites. Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites.
The national emphasis on standardized testing has pushed subjects other than math and reading into the background. This includes arts education. But according to a national experiment led by the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, infusing the school day with more arts resulted in better attendance and behavior and slightly better math and reading scores for 8 struggling schools around the country. Targeted schools were provided with teacher training, free supplies, mini grants, and a mentor. And in the case of one school, that mentor was the artist Chuck Close. For the period from 2011 to 2014, math proficiency rose almost 23%, and reading proficiency increased by 13%.
If you've heard that just spending money on public education isn't the answer, you may have been misinformed. A recent study conducted by economists C. Carabo Jackson, Rucker Johnston, and Claudia Persico suggests that money does produce results. The economists looked at periods from 1955 through 1985 when courts ordered governments to spend more on schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. They followed how students in those areas did up through 2011. The result? Spending works.
Inside Higher Ed reports that the confidence expressed by college grads about their preparedness for the work world may be overblown. A recent study reveals that college students are out of sync with employers. While students feel they have a wide range of skills and knowledge, employers say many grads lack any number of important employment-related skills and abilities.
Results from a survey on parents' attitudes on student privacy show that 89% of Americans, whether parents or not, are concerned about advertisers using kids' personal data to market to them. And nearly 6 in 10 parents know little or nothing about schools letting private companies store personal data about their children. Jim Steyer, founder and CEO of Common Sense Media, which commissioned the survey, said, quote, "What we are hearing from American families is that students' personal and private information must not be for sale, period."
Well, my response to that is, why should it be any different? We're just getting the kids used to it. And I think privacy may be an old, antiquated concept.
Certainly is, but children are the most vulnerable and the least control over what's used against them.
Something to be concerned about.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, that does it for this edition of EdCast.
Until next time, class dismissed.